Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 8th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1935. John Ford released a small-budget film starring Victor McLaglen called The Informer. The dark thriller was not a big box office success, but it was a huge hit with critics. The film eventually earned 6 Oscar nominations and took home 4 trophies, including Ford for Best Director. But it was Mutiny on the Bounty that took home Best Picture without winning any other Oscars. So why did The Informer come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Informer. Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today we have reached the 8th Academy Awards. Still can't believe I'm already in the single digits here. Talking about 1935, where The Informer was the confirmed runner-up by the Academy, and Mutiny on the Bounty was the Best Picture winner. And joining me today is one of my favorite Oscar obsessives on Twitter, who always has interesting thoughts about various performances and films. We actually spoke a few weeks ago on the Film Experience podcast together about the supporting actress nominees of 1965, which was very fun. Writer at the Film Experience, welcome to the show, Baby Clyde.
Hi, real pleasure to be here.
Yes.
I remember the very first episode of your podcast, and I listened to it, and I thought, I'd like to be on that one day.
And now here
And
you
we
are, almost 3 years later.
85 episodes later, I think it is, but here I am.
Yes. Yes, you just made it in almost under the wire here, you know. We only have like 8 or so episodes here left, so very happy to have you.
Now because it gets. So I was going to say, I'm glad you asked me now because it gets far more complicated after this, doesn't it? When all the years get muddled up and the nominees all over the place. So I've kind of snuck in just before it gets like really complicated.
Yes, exactly. But at the same time, this is an interesting year here because there are 12 Best Picture nominees. So the Academy just nominated any old film that came out in 1935, apparently. So I'm excited to get into all of those, right? Yeah, well, I know that you are an Oscar completist, and I know that you like to rewatch films, so I knew that you could be counted on to do this one, at least.
I've rewatched, I think it's 17 films, well, not just watched and rewatched 17 films this week.
Wow.
When you asked me to do this, it was the middle of the London Film Festival, and I think I watched 15 films in the London Film Festival, and then I had to watch 17 films for this. So the last 2 weeks have been kind of crazy.
Wow.
I got there. I did it.
Well, thank you for your dedication. I hope the people enjoy this. I'm very much looking forward to it. So if you're ready to jump in, we can.
Go ahead.
All right, let's talk The Informer, the confirmed runner-up of Best Picture in 1935. It is a film based on the 1925 novel of the same name that is set in Dublin and centers on a man named Jippo Nolan, who was at one point in the Irish Republican Army but was kicked out, and his girlfriend wants to go to America for a better life, but it costs money to do that, so he finds a way of trying to pay for it by turning on his friend, Frankie McPhillip, who was a wanted fugitive, and so he informs on him to the police, so he gets his reward and then spends a night on the town, drinking the night away. But then the IRA turn up and assume that he is the one who informed, and we spend much of the film of them confirming their suspicions and chasing after him. So the film was directed by John Ford and written by Dudley Nichols, adapting Liam O'Flaherty's novel. It stars Victor McLaglen as Jippo, Heather Angel, Preston Foster, Margot Graham, Wallace Ford, Donald Meek, and Una O'Connor. The Informer was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning 4, making it the winningest film of the night, but it did not win Best Picture. Okay, so Baby Clyde, what is your relationship with The Informer? And I'm curious how, if you have rewatched it for this, how any of your thoughts might have changed. What are your general thoughts on
Well,
this film?
I made a bit of a schoolboy error because when I went to rewatch all the films, I remember I said to you, you said to me, we're doing 35. I said, oh, that must be The Informer. And you confirmed that it was.
Mm-hmm.
I then watched The Informer straight away, like last Sunday, I think it was. So I've now watched 17 films from 1935 since then. I should have left this till last. This should have been the last film I watched before I came in. Unfortunately, I've now got 17 more films in my head.
It's okay.
It's fantastic. The Informer is just great. It's just fantastic. I've seen it, I think, a couple of times before, but it wouldn't have been for many, many, many years. I mean, my Oscar obsession started like decades and decades ago, and I watched a lot of stuff then that I haven't necessarily watched again for 10, 20 years in some cases. I was actually surprised at how much I loved it. Certainly films from this era can be quite creaky, especially kind of the dramas. And this isn't a big, well, we'll come to these later, but this isn't a big swashbuckling adventure dramas. It's very small, set over sort of 24 hours, black and white, of course, no real stars. And you worry that it's going to be just a bit dull, you know, and it just isn't. It's just really, really sensational.
Yeah, totally. So I'm not even going to bother with suspense with the end of the show as far as my thoughts on all of the Best Picture nominees. I truly think that The Informer towers over the rest of this competition, and its quality, I think, is clear to me from the start with just even the first 5 minutes or so of virtually silent storytelling where you learn everything you need to know through visual language. You know, it starts off with a quote about Judas from the Bible, which says, "Then Judas repented himself and cast down the 30 pieces of silver and departed." So there's a suggestion about betrayal, obviously, but also something like forgiveness and atonement. And we see that this guy, Jippo, is clearly down on his luck, not really the brightest bulb, kind of a big oaf, and someone who is just not comfortable with what his life has become, and he's embarrassed that his girlfriend is sort of, you know, selling herself out in order to make money. He looks at this 20-pound reward for his friend as a way out, and it's interesting that the way we are able to sympathize with him, but also recognize what he's doing, what he's considering is wrong, and it's this huge, like, life-altering betrayal. But there's kind of a simple quality to him that you could tell from the jump that he doesn't really understand the gravity of what he's about to do, and that all just comes full circle later. So
I've watched so many films from the 60s and 50s and 60s this year. I've been following on Twitter with you, rewatching all the performances every year and voting. And I basically watched every performance from 69 down to what we're down to 52 or something now, aren't I?
Yeah.
So this whole year is full of 50s and 60s films for me. So suddenly watching this big chunk of films from the 30s, there's so much stuff I love. So much. The way they do things just really appeals to me in a way that the 50s especially don't. Because of the influx of TV, they thought they needed to make everything bigger, didn't they, in the 50s? Right, bigger and brasher and wider and longer. Oh my God, longer. And the economy in which the films are told in the 30s is just brilliant. As you say, that first 5 minutes, we're told so much story, so much backstory. We just know who all these people are. We know exactly what's happening within 5 minutes. And as you say, it's mostly silent. In a film from 1956, that would have been dragged out to the first 45 minutes, wouldn't it? You know, and I just love the way they do that. I also love little things that they do in the 50s a lot, where you can't actually say someone's a prostitute, so they're like a dancer, or I don't know what she's. I'm not sure how they got away with it actually. She's quite clearly a prostitute. His girlfriend, isn't she? She's literally approaching men on the street, which I thought they were going to turn into something else, and they didn't. But you're right. The way it's set up is the economy is just really, really impressive to me. The way you can pack that much information into such a short amount of time. And I love that. I love that about a lot of these films actually. How they manage to do such a lot in such a short amount of time. I wish films today would take more notice.
Absolutely. And I was reading that this was only filmed in 18 days, and it was a very small budget comparatively to most of the other films nominated here. So it's kind of just like the indie type of film in this particular race when you think about it. But also like that critic's darling.
Yeah. It only got made because it was so cheap, you know. It's like, it was almost like they were just like, oh, you know, let's just give John Ford one and just let him get on with it. And it wasn't a hit, was it? It wasn't a hit on first release. But the quality has stood up, you know, in a way that so many of the others haven't.
Yes. Well, I think Victor McLaglen just delivers such a knockout performance here, especially because he spends most of the film drunk. And getting drunker as the night goes on, and I just found his portrayal of that to be very believable. And I know some of that was actually reflected in like what was happening behind the scenes, where John Ford actually got him drunk at multiple points, and he also kind of verbally abused him and just kind of made life hell for him to the point that he was considering quitting acting, which is not great. But I think it partly explains why he feels so authentic and just worn down in so many scenes here. You know?
Absolutely. It kind of feels almost kind of documentary in parts. People playing drunk is always a bit cringe sometimes, isn't it? So when someone really nails it, as he does here, I mean, this is in my top 10 best actors of all time. Wow. He's just brilliant from the very, very beginning. He manages to tell you so much without actually sort of verbalizing it. But he's a completely convincing drunk, completely convincing. At no time does he really feel like he's performing drunk. And as we've both noted, I think he probably was drunk quite often. But it really feels real. It really, really does feel. It feels lived in. This feels like a real character.
And it's remarkable how this is a guy who, for all intents and purposes, would be the villain of most stories, you know, someone who just sinks so low that he turns on one of his best friends and just also like hurts the cause that he was a part of, all for pretty much selfish reasons. And yet, as the film goes along, at least for me, I did find myself just frustrated in a good way with just like how easily he just squanders his big second chance by just like casually spending his money wherever he gets the opportunity and just buying drinks for everyone and just like making a decision to give money to this random woman he just met who wants to run away like he does. And it's like he just completely digs a hole for himself that he cannot get out of. And at a certain point, you just kind of feel sorry for him. You know, I don't know what your experience was of watching this character, how your sympathies lie with him.
Well, you're right. I don't really know why we sympathise with him, but we really do from the very beginning. He basically sells out his best friend. And yet at no point does he feel like the villain of the piece, which is a kind of remarkable now. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but at no point did I really think him as the villain of the piece, which is strange. My entire Letterboxd review for The Informer was Jippo has no chill, which is it's kind of the problem with the film, or a problem with the film, but it's one that I kind of have an answer for. The fact that he does this thing specifically for money, specifically so he can go to America with his girlfriend. He needs £20, he gets £20, and so anyone who was not Jippo would immediately have waited till morning and gone and bought those tickets, wouldn't they? But Jippo, the minute it happens, the minute £20 is in his hand, goes to a bar, orders a bottle of whiskey, starts drinking it. And it's just downhill from then. I mean, there's no going back, is there? So, I mean, it doesn't maybe feel entirely true to life that someone would do that. And yet, naming no names, I have friends who have had, you know, addiction problems or drink problems, and there's a moment, if you've been out with them for the night, after a couple of drinks, where you can see that switch in their head. You can see there is no going back. You know, we are now out for the night, and there is no stopping this. You know, it doesn't matter what you do or say. Common sense has gone out the window. Jippo is not a bright man. I mean, that's clear from the very beginning, And I think the minute he's done this, he regrets it. I think he's given the money, which is really dismissively given to him. He's not praised by the police or anything, is he? It's literally sort of thrown on the table and he's bundled out the door. So you can just imagine that he's done this thing, immediately regrets it, feels that this is kind of blood money, and wants to get rid of it as soon as possible. And he wants to block out what he's just done through drink. So it's kind of just a downward spiral, isn't it, for the next the whole evening? It starts at 9 o'clock at night or something, isn't it, and then continues round. For the whole evening, it's just a downward spiral of him drinking and acting recklessly, which I did sympathise with. I have friends who I could literally see this behaviour in friends of mine, and I did sympathise with a character who shouldn't be sympathetic, but for some reason he is. I think it's a lot to do with Victor McLachlan's performance.
Yeah, he just wants to have a good time and be happy and celebrate life, and he's also very adaptable. I think, like when he goes to what I assume is supposed to be a brothel, again, one of those things that's very vague and not really explicitly stated, but pretty much
they call it a shebeen, don't they? But it's
right.
It's
yeah, yeah. And he can just like have a conversation with anybody, and even though he can be a bit crude, there's something almost charming about him and just how simple he is sometimes. And I will say, even though I think this is a great film, that there is a bit of an obviousness at times to where he's just trying to lie his way out of getting caught, but he's also so clearly lying and making up stories and just totally improvising, but being so obvious about it in how he's just like accusing other people of being the informer, like Mulligan, where he's basically just like pausing and trying to formulate a story in his mind, and like they're clearly onto him, but they sort of let him off scot-free because they don't really have enough evidence. But it's just one of those things that you see sometimes in like even sitcoms where it's very evident that this person is lying and trying to not get caught, and the other people aren't really calling him out on it or just assume he's telling the truth, even though he's just showing all of the signs of being guilty. But at the same time, considering how drunk he is for a majority of the film, I think a little bit of that, brain fogginess makes sense, but it's one of those things that just annoys me sometimes in film or TV when like another character clearly can't tell that the other person is full of shit,
Well, it's that thing where from a performance perspective, you need the audience to know that you're lying. So the actor has to give away signs that they are lying so the audience can see this, but then the actor acting with them has to pretend they don't see what we see.
It's a fine line. I know.
in order for, especially when you're doing something as short as this, you're trying to cram it in as quickly. You need to be able to sort of signify those things in a way that the audience can catch on. I think he's really childlike. It's like he's lying like a child, isn't he? He has not thought this through, so he's having to make it up as he goes along and doesn't really know what he's doing. He comes up with some like story about mugging a sailor or something, doesn't he? But it's clearly he's done this thing without thinking, and then he does not have a story in place. If you or I were going to do it, we would have got it all like properly set down in the first place. We would have got witnesses and things, wouldn't we? We would have this sorted out. He just does it on a whim. He does it on the spur of the moment, and then has to then backtrack and try and cover up, which he's not capable of doing. A, because he's not very bright in the first place, and B, because he's by this point absolutely shit-faced. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also a very well edited film. It's only 90 minutes, but it only takes place over the course of one night, and it captures that very effectively. And it also, I think, does a good job of varying the types of scenes to where it's not repetitive, even though we do see him drinking a lot and lying a lot. It's all sequenced in a way that I think there's a real forward momentum to this. Kind of like that downward spiral type of thing, especially by the time we get to that little interrogation scene where the IRA is grilling him and he's put into a cell where he's able to escape from out of the ceiling. It's very tense and exciting, and you begin to really feel the tragedy of the situation, where then we also check in on some of the female characters like Katie and also Mary McPhillip, and how they didn't ask for all of this trouble, but there's a bit of that doomed aspect to it that is very compelling, especially also with the cinematography being very almost film noirish feeling at times. Yeah. So I think it's just very, like I said, very well edited, very well sequenced. Nothing feels out of place. It never drags at any point. So, like I said, just a really well put together
and
sequence.
it's quite simple. You know, it's not like a very convoluted, complicated tale, which I admire. I don't think we needed extra characters. We didn't need anything extra in there. And they do a really good job of propelling it forward, and yet with no, we don't go off track at all, do we? As I say, I'm so pleased this was 90 minutes, and if it had been dragged out to 180 or whatever it would have been in the 50s or 60s, then it would have not worked at all for me. It's the fact that it's the economy that makes it work so well. I think we just didn't need anything else. We needed Victor McLaglen's fantastic performance and that sort of feeling of doom. We all know this is not going to end well, don't we? And it's really taut. It's just really, really well done. You're right about sort of noir. It feels kind of like it's got kind of a feel of like German expressionism somewhere in there as well. Not totally up on that sort of era, but you can feel it's very shadowy, isn't it? It's very kind of it's very kind of taut and tight, and it's just great. It's just a really, really well done film that doesn't feel like anything else of that year. Anything else that we saw that year. Nothing else that's on the on the list anyway.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that upon my own watch, which I did watch this last because I like to have it super fresh in my mind. But just like the lead up to this movie was just like, this feels like it's from a different year almost, or almost a different decade. Yeah. So pretty wild. I also wanted to touch on the score. Max Steiner wins for best score, and it's definitely noticeable in the beginning, but I can't really recall much from the rest of it, possibly because it just blended in so well that it didn't stick out, which is sometimes the mark of a good score.
Oh, you got me there. Listen, one of the things I really, really hate about a film is when I notice the score.
Yeah.
When a score really takes me out of a film, it just really, really, really irritates me. So the very fact I didn't particularly notice the score is a good thing. That to me shows it did everything it was supposed to do. If it heightens tension here, or it notes something over there, that's great. But when it starts intruding, I get really, really annoyed. There's been a couple of recent things where people have marvelled over the score, and I've just been like, no, it just drove me mad. And so the fact that I didn't notice it at all is a compliment.
Yeah, there you go. So I want to talk about the ending. I'll just say a spoiler warning here. If everything we just talked about sounds good to you, hit pause and watch it all the way through. Again, it's only 90 minutes, so quick watch and then come right back so we can talk about this ending. Okay, so I'm curious your thoughts on, Jippo entering the church at the end and seeing Frankie's mother there praying and him just begging for forgiveness. And she does, without much equivocation or anything, she just sincerely forgives him and he keels over. It's a very theatrical ending, but I think effective and necessary for the arc, and logical considering when it comes out that there's a sense of atoning for your sins type of thing. What do you think of the ending?
I mean, I read that initially it wasn't like that. I think he just went down to the docks and died initially, and they made them do a reshoot or change the ending because they felt it needed that kind of redemption arc.
Well, there you go.
The thing is, when you watch, as many films as we do, you realise that you have to watch certain eras in certain ways, and you can watch a lot of 30s things, and people would roll their eyes or think it was naff or tacky or really obvious. But when you're watching, when you know about sort of 30s cinema, it's the 30s. It has to end like that. Right. How else could it end? It just feels obvious, doesn't it? That he's going to conveniently go in the very church that his friend's mother is praying in, who's going to forgive him immediately, and then he's going to keel over and die that very second. That's what you want to happen in 30s cinema. it just feels like that it was meant to be, really.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely, I didn't actually know about the fact that it wasn't really the original ending, but now that you say it, it makes a lot of sense. Once again, it sort of all clicks into place, like when you hear of all other alternate endings that were initially planned, but the studio made them change it for something more satisfying. Yeah.
You also get more of Una O'Connor, which is what we always want, so anytime that she can pop up in anything, I'm always happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think old Victor here takes up a lot of the oxygen when it comes to performance here. But are there any other performances you want to highlight? I don't think anyone outside of him necessarily stands out as like Oscar worthy, but what do you think?
No, they don't. I mean, everyone's capable, aren't they? I think there's a lot going through the films. There's a lot of fantastic character actors. Those faces you really know that you only really get in the 30s. There's lots of much older, really kind of really characterful looking people that you see in these films, and you see so many of them in the same films actually over and over again. I love that about 30s cinema, how they're just peppered with all these amazing great character actors who pop up even in the smallest roles. You always get someone like brilliantly cast. They've got so much character, for character actors, which is the case throughout this. It's like there's lots of what's his name? Donald Meek shows up, doesn't he? Donald Meek's the guy he tries to blame. Right. He's always fantastic in everything. Una O'Connor, as I say, and she also turns up in other things later in the watch. I just love all those kind of people who sort of litter the background in all those films, and it's certainly true here. Not so true as some of the others later on. I think, as you say, this is the Victor McClaglen show. It's almost irrelevant who the other people hanging around are. No one, certainly, I'm sure we're going to be talking about supporting performances that would have come in later years, but no one here especially stands out. Because he, as you say, sucks up all the oxygen in the room. He really does.
Yeah, I mean,
and when I say that's not a criticism. Often that's a criticism when you say someone sucks all the air out the room. But no, he really does, and that's for the best.
Right. Just in terms of our discussion, there's only so much you can talk about with the other actors here. I mean, I think Una O'Connor, even though it's a very, very small part, is quite effective as Frankie's mother. So I like her. I wouldn't have been surprised by a nomination for her, especially considering they did love the movie enough to give it 6 nominations and 4 wins, that maybe she could have got carried along for the ride and supporting if it existed then. But
yeah, totally. And she's playing the sympathetic role of the dead boy's mother, so that's right. Like very basic.
Yes, very, very much so. All the people in the IRA are a bit indistinguishable for me and just don't really have much to do, so yeah.
Totally indistinguishable, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So anything else you want to talk about with The Informer before we move on to the Oscars?
Nothing specific, but during lockdown, I was going on just huge walks around London. So I would just go out, put a podcast in, and just like walk. So I'd walk out of my house and I'd walk north, east, south, or west every single day. And I would sometimes walk for like 4 hours. I've lived in London for like nearly 30 years, and I would just discover places I'd never seen before. It was fantastic. And one of the things I did find, I was walking down through Stepney, and I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. I put a picture up. I found a blue plaque. I don't think do you have blue plaques in America?
No.
I should explain to everyone I'm actually in London to make more sense.
Right.
A blue plaque is a plaque that goes on the wall of a house if someone like historically prominent has lived there. So it can be writers, or there was one maybe where Florence Nightingale would have lived, or just that kind of thing. So where famous people have lived over time, and you get these special things called a blue plaque, and it's put on the house to just say so and so lived here. And I was walking down through Stepney, and there's one for Victor McClaglen. It said here lived Oscar-winning actor Victor McClaglen during these years or something. It's just really cool. You find them quite a lot around, but I was really funny that I saw one. I would never have thought he's not really famous in Britain. He's not sort of remembered now. So it was really cool. He's actually got his own blue plaque where he used to live down in Stepney.
Yeah, I can see this now just from your Twitter here. Yeah, in memory of Victor Andrew DeBeer McLaughlin. Yes, and then boxer and Oscar winner for The Informer. I like that they include the film name on it as well, just for full context. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that is The Informer. It is a quick 90 minutes, so highly recommend it. All right. So when we come back, we will be delving into the Oscars of 1935 and talking about why Mutiny on the Bounty won Best Picture over The Informer.
Like this,
Well, speak up. What do you want to say?
I've come to claim the £20 reward for Frankie McPhilip.
Frankie McPhilip?
He's not here. Get out! Get out of the way! Let me Dan! Oh, tell me you're giving him a chance. There's no harm in him. He didn't know what he was doing. Mr. Phillips, for the sake of your own love, won't you be asking him to give my dad a chance?
Katie, this is no time for sentiment. This is war.
And we're back. So now we'll be talking about the Oscars of 1935 and Mutiny on the Bounty, The Informer, and then 10 other Best Picture nominees. It's going to be a long one, folks. All right, so The Informer was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for John Ford, Best Actor for Victor McLaglen, Best Adaptation, That's what it was called then. Best Adaptation, not Best Adapted Screenplay. Best Film Editing, and Best Score. And it won for Director, Actor, Adaptation, and Score. So, an amazing haul. Just to briefly touch on precursors, even though they really don't matter that much back then, I would argue that The Informer walked into the night as a bit of a frontrunner. It won the New York Film Critics Best Picture Award unanimously, and it won the National Board of Review for Best Film. So that's all we really had for precursors in that time. So that is all we can go on.
If only we could go back to those days.
I know. Yeah, it would make things a lot more interesting these days. Okay, so Mutiny on the Bounty. Why do we think Mutiny on the Bounty wins Best Picture? And also, why does it win nothing else?
I think it's pretty clear why it wins, actually. It's like the Titanic of its day, isn't it? It's the great, big, glossy, star-filled, expensive, giant hit from MGM. It was the biggest moneymaker of the year. You can give it Best Film. I don't think anyone's particularly arguing that it deserved its other awards. Also, we see it got, 8 nominations. 2 of those are made up from like extraneous acting nominations, aren't they, which I'm sure we'll come to later. It makes perfect sense that it won Best Picture. You know, they weren't really on the whole giving Best Picture awards out then to tiny little dramas, you know, about the IRA. It wasn't really a thing, was it? Almost sort of bigger's better. I'm sure MGM block voted. It's a really good film. You know, Mutiny on the Bounty is really, really good. I really enjoyed Mutiny on the Bounty. It's not my favourite, but you can't really argue with it winning, and I don't really dispute any of its losses, do you?
No, not particularly. I'm just looking over.
Me too.
Director, I wouldn't have given to Frank Lloyd. I think Victor McLaglen is just so far above everyone else that I wouldn't have given it to any of the 3 actors that are nominated in Best Actor. And Best Adaptation, I mean, I don't know. Seems like a good adaptation, even though there's some historical inaccuracies that I've read. But I think The Informer clearly deserved to win that. Best Score, you know, it has a more distinct score than The Informer, but perhaps speaking to what you were saying earlier, you know, a bit more noticeable, and maybe that's not a great thing. And what else is there?
Well, editing. I mean, when you see
editing.
What actually won editing,
yeah.
I mean, we'll come to that later.
Oh boy,
sure.
yeah.
Oh my god. But I mean, any of the others there could have won editing. I think The Informer would have been a great winner actually, because as we said, it's very well edited. Got no problem with Mutiny and the Bounty maybe winning there, but it doesn't feel like it was egregiously snubbed. Just from winning best picture.
Right.
I think it won the big one. And that's what's important, really, isn't it?
Right. I think traditionally, like, again, I think the Academy was definitely more willing to spread the wealth with picture and director in these early days, kind of like they've now become again, but in the long middle. Yeah. In the sort of long middle of 60 or 70 years, picture and director have been historically tied so close together that you would expect Frank Lloyd to possibly win that, but at the same time,
Frank Lloyd had already won 2,
right?
At that point, so he'd won in 30 and 32 or something, 33. So he really didn't need a third, and I'm sure that was kind of in people's mind, even as it is today. We all know that we all vote that way, even when we're choosing our favourites. We all do that calculation, don't we? That they don't need one, they've already got one. I'm sure that was certainly true back then as well. He'd actually been the Academy head for the 2 years previously, so maybe it was also a bit too insidery to actually give him the award when he was the president of the Academy.
Right. Of course, none of this stopped John Ford from winning 4 Best Director awards, but
no,
regardless.
No, and won 2 in a row, didn't he? So
right. So this is another case where it's really not a surprise, given just the crop of nominees overall, that Mutiny on the Bounty was our winner. It's an extravagant production, #1 film of 1935. It has well-liked stars. It's based on a novel, which is based on a real-life situation that happened. Going to different lands, there's almost like a theatrical element, almost like Shakespearean in terms of like big mutiny, romance, and all that, adventure. It's all there. And I actually really like this film. I think all the performances are really good. Charles Laughton is perfect for these kinds of villainous types of roles. Captain Bligh. Clark Gable as the sort of dashing hero who speaks for the people, and then Francois Tone. I don't know how exactly to pronounce that, but
I think that's right. It's Franco. I don't think it's Franco.
Franco. Okay, good. Okay. Didn't really have any attachment to him before this as just an actor, even though he shows up quite a bit this year.
He does indeed, yes.
But I'm glad they're all nominated. I think they're all pretty good, and I think the build up to the mutiny is really well executed, and all that tension, very well edited. I know, again, there's some historical inaccuracies here and there, but really fun epic, and leagues better than the remake starring Marlon Brando that was also nominated for Best Picture. So,
oh my God, it wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Lord.
And nothing else above the line, which is funny. But
yeah, but I think we can agree. It's not only is it an unsurprising winner, but it's not an undeserving winner. We may prefer other films, but you can't be mad this one. It feels like quintessential big studio affair of 1935.
Right. And I talked on the 1936 episode, it wasn't called Best Picture necessarily then. It was called Outstanding Production. And I think, the production on a grand scale like Mutiny on the Bounty was they naturally gravitate towards a movie like this rather than this little small thing that the critics liked, but maybe didn't give you the same amount of warm, swashbuckly sort of entertainment at the movies type of feeling,
Absolutely. It's the Depression, Who wants to go to a film about IRA people shooting each other when they can go and be swept away to the South Seas? It makes so much more sense, doesn't it? I thought it was interesting what you said at the beginning, and as you've been counting down the years, maybe you can tell me. This year, we actually know who the runner-up is. They actually released the results afterwards, didn't they? So we know that the Academy, the Informer was the runner-up, as we do with the acting nominations as well. Is that true? I think this was the last time, maybe in the first and last time that happened. Do you know about 36?
36, they did release that the story of Louis Pasteur was the runner-up. Yes. So that was the last time.
They can't do it these days, and they shouldn't do it these days. But I really think on the 100th birthday, the 100th birthday of the Oscars, which is 7 years away. I really think, just for us Oscar nerds, please, just like do like a couple of years at a time, you know?
Yeah, I would love that. Those super early years and go, you know, chronologically.
Yeah.
It's not like any of these, like, I mean, all these people are not around anymore, so it's not going to be like hurting their careers or anything that they came in last in one Oscar year.
No. And it's also, it's very kind of like niche anyway. It's not like masses of people who are going to care, is there? But for people like us, it's really, really, really care about this sort of thing.
Oh, for sure.
Obviously, yes. we just the only really important thing is we'd all need to know. We'd all need to make sure we were alive for 1950. That's the big one, isn't it? But
oh yes.
Up until then, I just don't see the harm. You know, I don't think they should be releasing them now. I don't even think they should be releasing them recent. But I certainly don't think from 100 years ago it would do any harm.
Yeah. Amen to that. Hoping that happens on the big centennial. Okay, so let's get to some of these Twitter questions. All right. So lots of questions about Mutiny on the Bounty here. This is from Jeffrey Kerr. We already touched on this a bit, but just acknowledging the question. Mutiny on the Bounty is currently the last film to have won Best Picture as its only award on Oscar night. Did it deserve to win anything else?
We've literally just done that, haven't we? So I think the answer is we're perfectly fine with it not winning everything else. I don't think you can't really judge the back then the way you can now. And certainly you can't judge now like you could. It's all changed since the Best Picture is voted for differently than every other category, something which I have many views on. But so now it's also like every record kind of needs to be thrown away, doesn't it? Because you're not comparing like with like. Back then it just wasn't the same thing, you know. Winning Grand Hotel also won Best Picture, didn't it? And there's one other before it, I think, as well.
Broadway Melody.
Was it Broadway Melody? Okay. There weren't as many awards for starters. So when you've only got, 12 awards, is there? 14, 15, maybe 15 something. But we've got like an extra, 24 now, isn't there? And you didn't have that kind of tribal almost thing. You director and picture didn't necessarily have a connection. Interestingly, having been reading so much about it this year, you know, this year was the year of the big kind of like strike and the big protest against the Academy. So the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, and whatever the Screen Actors were at the time. I don't think SAG existed, but whatever the actors won at the moment, they all kind of boycotted the Oscars. Something to do with like a wage dispute or something. I couldn't quite get to the bottom of it. So what I can't work out is how big the Academy actually was. I've read things that there was about 600 members, but it seems that maybe by the time the Academy Awards came down, there was only 40 members. I've read somewhere because people were being told not to leave. So I'm really curious as to what the actual voting totals were. I mean, how many people voted in this?
Right. Yeah, I read the same thing from Inside Oscar.
Could it be that only 40 people voted? You know,
yeah, which that's a lot of power. I mean, damn. Yeah.
So I'm really confused as to the actual truth of that. I haven't managed to get to the bottom of it, but even 600 is a really small amount, isn't it, compared to these days?
Comparatively, absolutely.
So a particular studio, again, I'm sure we'll come to later, but a particular studio could have a huge amount of sway over what the winners were, depending on how many members they actually had in the Academy at the time.
Yeah. This is from Glenda Miss Jackson, if you're nasty. Mutiny on the Bounty, 35 or 62? Definitely 35. No question. I don't know anyone who would have said 62, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean,
outside of Marlon Brando himself.
I think I saw the 62 version many years ago. I've never felt the need to revisit.
It's bad. Yeah. Moving on. Ronaldo Sosa. Mutiny on the Bounty is credited as the reason for the creation of the supporting categories. Which one of the 3 Best Actor nominees, if any, do you think would be pushed in supporting if the category already existed?
I have lots of thoughts about this.
Uh-oh. Okay.
My answer is none of them.
Ooh, 3 leads, huh?
For various reasons. Firstly, people were not the thirsty hoes they are these days.
Tell them.
So that wouldn't happen for those reasons. But most importantly, back in the day, back in 1936, when the supporting nominees were brought in, for supporting categories were brought in, it wasn't so much to do with screen time. It was to do with your status. So stars went lead, supporting characters, the people I was talking about earlier, went supporting. Sometimes you'll find what's basically a lead role, but they weren't a star. They weren't an above the bill star, so they would go in the supporting category. And vice versa. Sometimes you will find a big star who's clearly in a supporting role, but they went lead because that's what you did. A star going supporting was just not done. It was hugely frowned upon. It would have, at this point, it wouldn't have even been an issue. It wouldn't have even been debated. You know, you were either a star or you weren't. And if you were a star, you were not going to go supporting. As it kind of went on into the 50s and 60s, it became more sort of pliable as to whether you could or not. But it was seen as a demotion. So a star being in a supporting role, being in a supporting category, would have been thought of as like a demotion. It would have been taken away from their star status. So none of them would have. Clark Gable absolutely was not. He's the king of Hollywood. He isn't going supporting, and he's not supporting anyway. The one with the least screen time is actually Charles Lawton. But Charles Lawton is top billed and had just won an Oscar 2 years before. He was not going supporting. That wasn't going to happen. And Franchot Tone, who was kind of the newcomer, he'd been around for a while, but this was his big breakout year. If you're a studio and you're trying to make someone into a big star, you don't put them into supporting category because it would have been a demotion. It would have made them lesser. If you're trying to build someone into a big star, you did not want them going into the supporting category. So if this was happening nowadays, what would happen is they would have chosen one of them. So if it was happening these days, obviously that wouldn't happen. But back then, if it was going to be an issue, I reckon they would have just not pushed all three to be nominated. But even back then, it wasn't the same. You didn't have these huge campaigns, so it wasn't like the studios were deciding beforehand which categories people were going in, or even campaigning for it. You know, I kind of feel it was more like you put the films out there and the chips fell where they fell, didn't they? There's lots of talk when you're reading up about 35 about this was the first year that anyone ever actually campaigned for a film, which was MGM, which is who wrote it? Who was the big famous American writer? I can't remember. It was an adaptation of a play or a book, and it got no nominations after they'd actually campaigned for it.
Yes, when you think about the context of it, I definitely agree that just in general, all three are leads, regardless of what sort of year that it's in. They all have kind of equal screen time, and sometimes that means everyone goes supporting, like they sometimes do that at the Emmys. But otherwise, no, I guess if there was one, it would be Franchot Tone, just because he didn't have as much of a status at the time as the other two. But otherwise, I would agree that they're all three leads. So there you go. So this is from Ronaldo Sosa. Franchot Tone and Charles Lawton had a very big year, being in multiple Oscar winners and nominees. Do you think either of them could have won if they weren't competing against two co-stars, or was Victor McLaglen unstoppable?
Just talking of that, we should probably explain. So Charles Lawton is in Mutiny on the Bounty. He's also in Les Miserables. He's also in Buckled for Best Picture. In fact, he made 3 films in 1935, and they were all nominated for Best Picture. I'm pretty certain that's never happened before or since.
Pretty sure John C. Reilly is in 3.
Ah, that's true. The Oscar nominated year. What were the 3 films that John C. Reilly was in?
Chicago, The Hours, and Gangs of New York.
Oh, that was a thing. I've totally forgotten that since. But Charles Lawton wasn't the only one. I mean, Franchot Tone was in Mutiny on the Bounty. He was also in Life of the Bengal Lancer, which was up for Best Picture. And he was Betty Davis's leading man in Dangerous, which she won Best Actor for. Interestingly, because I did a really nerdy deep dive, there's actually someone else who's in 3 of the Best Picture, which is a supporting character actress called Jessie Ralph. I don't even know who she was before now, but now I know all about her because she kept popping up in these films we were watching. I don't think that the fact they had these big banner years would have made any difference. I think that Tone's the newcomer, the grandest role, and I think that Charles Lawton had just won 2 years before, as had Clark Gable. Clark Gable won the year before. So I don't think there was any competition. It's just undeniable. I mean, I don't think there's any competition as far as I'm concerned as to who should have won that year.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there is that narrative of like Alicia Vikander has a really good year and then she wins an Oscar and then, haven't seen that much of her since, but that's neither here nor there. It's sometimes the whole like having a good year works, sometimes it doesn't, but when there's a performance that is unstoppable, as you're saying, Ronaldo Sosa, you just can't really compete with it. And looking at the actual totals, which were not totals, but just like ranking of how the votes came in, the three Mutiny on the Bounty stars all came in third, fourth, and fifth because Paul Mooney came in with a write-in nomination for Black Fury, and he came in second.
Yeah, I'm glad we've got to that point. I'm infuriated, and I have been for years now, that we keep not just Oscar people, but the Academy themselves. The Academy themselves on their website has Paul Mooney down as a nominee.
Yeah.
Which he wasn't. And it's happened a lot this year, because what the Academy did, I think it was just in 34 and 35, they would do their nominations and then they would allow people to write in. If they wanted to write someone else in, they were allowed to do so. Basically, the year before was when Betty Davis hadn't got nominated for Of Human Bondage. I'm sure you'll be coming to that next week. And so there was such an outcry that the Academy said, well, you can vote for it if you like, open it up and you can vote for whoever you like who isn't nominated. But that does not make them an official nominee. It's literally on the Academy's website that Paul Mooney was nominated for Black Fury. He was not nominated for Black Fury. It was a writing nomination. And from reading about it, it seems he came second because Jack Warner at Warner Brothers basically told everyone at Warner Brothers to vote for him. And if there was only 40 members of the Academy, that could have been a huge sway to people, couldn't it? So, he did apparently come second, as did there's other things. Michael Curtiz apparently came second in the Best Director. And we had a writing nominee actually win for cinematography, wasn't there, for Midsummer Night's Dream. Yes, I mean, it doesn't seem like the three were particularly strong. And I don't just think that's them cannibalising each other's vote. I think there was very good reasons why they weren't particularly strong.
Yeah. Well, this is from Joe Gouveia. Of the three Best Actor nominees from Mutiny on the Bounty, who do you prefer?
I mean, I suppose it's a clear-cut Charles Lawton, isn't it? Because he's the one with the sort of chewy role. Franco Tony's pleasant, if I'm remarkable. See, I have this thing that the acting roles, they're not actually for acting. They're for, I mean, they were back then. It was Best Actor, Best Actress back then. But now they're for performance by a what's the term now for the performance by an actor in a leading role or something, isn't it? I always argue that it's not about acting. It's about performance, and sometimes performance doesn't necessarily involve great acting. For example, when Jennifer Hudson won, Jennifer Hudson did not win for great acting, did she? But there's no denying she gave a great performance. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So to me, when you have someone like Clark Gable, who's not like a great actor, but he's a great movie star. He's just got that thing that you can't buy, you can't teach. You can over years of practice, you can become a good actor. You can't become a good movie star. You either are or you're not. The camera either loves you and you have that charisma or you don't. And Clark Gable just has it more than probably any other man who's ever set foot in front of a camera. So I think Clark Gable is fantastic in this. He's just perfectly cast. He's perfectly Clark Gable, I think if it was down to me, I would probably vote for him just because I love that movie star like glow that proper movie stars have. But I suppose like objectively the best performance is Charles Lawton. Also because he'd had that banner year, because he has two other great performances that year as well. You probably would have voted for him.
Yeah, I think in general, watching all of these movies within a week or two, seeing all these Charles Lawton performances just kind of naturally rises him above these other two for me.
Sure.
So I would say him. Plus, it's just an iconic type of character. So,
have you actually seen Black Fury, the Paul Mooney film?
No, I did not watch it.
It's the last thing I watched before. No, the second to last thing I watched before before we did this. I watched 5 films today.
That's insane.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
But Paul Mooney is a weird one because he's clearly a very, very good actor, but he's always got a shtick. He's always got something. He's got a limp or a beard or he's always got something. He never just acts, and it's kind of frustrating. You're just like, Paul, put down the props, In this, he's got a ridiculously thick, like Slavic accent to the point you can't quite understand what he's talking about. So yeah, he is a lot. I really like him as an actor, but he's just a lot sometimes.
Yeah, I would call him hit or miss personally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get to these other Best Picture nominees. Again, we have 10 more movies to talk about. Some perhaps more so than others we can get into. But let's get into them alphabetically, starting with Alice Adams. So, Katharine Hepburn movie, and just the film and her in Best Actress get nominated. This is her second nomination of 12, 2 years after her first win for Morning Glory. And we see her here playing a role that she maybe doesn't play very much, at least in terms of what people know her from and for her other Oscar nominations, because she isn't playing a sort of like highfalutin New England sort of well-read kind of girl, because here she's lower class and also deeply ashamed of being lower class and just desperately wants to fit in with higher society. So we see quite a bit of vulnerability from Katharine Hepburn. And, you know, the big climax of the film is her having her suitor over for dinner, played by Fred McMurray, who is in a higher class, and just like making her family act like they're richer than they are. And it becomes kind of a big screwball comedy almost. Yeah, what do you think of Alice Adams?
I may surprise people here to say this is my slam dunk winner of the year.
Ooh, wow.
And and Katharine Hepburn should have walked that. I mean, it's not even close. I love Alice Adams. I've known this film for since I very first got into films 30 odd years ago. For some reason, I saw this really early, and I just love it. You hit the nail on the head. It's the vulnerability of her, which you don't see like Katharine Hepburn. My all-time favourite Katharine Hepburn performances are those ones. It's Summertime, it's The Rainmaker. When she's not playing that sort of strident character that she does so often, she's my all-time favourite actress. But there's elements of Katharine Hepburn I really, really don't like. So I don't like her in the highfalutin upper class East Coast thing that she does. It's just beautiful, you know. I think it's probably not necessarily particularly likable herself, but yeah, there's something just unlikable about her in those roles. I just don't find charming at all. And yet here, I just think she's kind of heartbreaking, and at the same, it's so brilliantly done, because she should be much like the Informer. Actually, she should be almost she's not a negative role. It's not a positive role, is it? We shouldn't like her at all. Yet you do. You can't help but be cringing so badly for her. When she's sat at the dance and no one's talking to her, so she's pretending to laugh at things that aren't there. You know, she's pretending, and she goes and sits with this old woman and says, "Can I come and sit with you?" And it's just so excruciating. And you can't really blame her. It's her mother, and it's also just general misogyny. You see how her brother does not care about these people at all. Her brother is perfectly happy at a jazz club and playing dice with the help. But as a woman, she isn't able to do that. She can't even go to the party herself without an escort. So her brother is made to go with her. So it's kind of the society she's in that's forced her into this situation, rather than anything sort of really negative about herself. I mean, she's awful. She's clearly awful, but you kind of understand why she's awful. It's not really her fault. And that dinner party scene is one of my all-time favourite scenes in cinema history. It's just genius. At the time, it was really progressive, because you have the black maid, the great, obviously, Hattie McDaniel. I think it's actually shown in the South, because she was seen as being not deferential enough. Basically, they hire this maid to come and serve dinner, and the maid she's chewing gum. She's got her finger in the soup. She just doesn't care. She just just family that she's been hired to look after. It's just brilliant. It's literally one of my all-time favourite films.
Yeah, it's that entire third act scene is just really fun. I mean, I also love the shot where the camera just stays on her father as he's eating caviar and just really struggling to put up a brave face, which is just classic comedy. Yeah, and there's also some interesting examination of class struggle that I'm definitely seeing a lot of films from this era tackling, especially in comedies, all in the wake of the Great Depression. So I'm sure this definitely resonated at the time. Yeah. Let's get to this question from Andrew Carden. Where does Alice Adams rank for you among the Hepburn Oscar-nominated turns you've seen?
This is second for me after Summertime, for which I would also have her winning. This is up there with my Hepburns of all time. I mean, my other really, really favourite Hepburn performance is Bring It Up Baby, which of course she wasn't nominated for. But yeah, this is one of the reasons why I would hold her in such high esteem. She's just brilliant in this film.
Wow. Okay. I would rank her, of the ones that I've seen, which is not all of them, but I've seen most. I would rank her probably fourth overall, behind Summertime and The Philadelphia Story and The Lion in Winter.
Obviously, The Lion in Winter is the obvious one. Obviously, The Lion in Winter is the other big one. It's interesting you said The Philadelphia Story. That would be very near the bottom of mine, if not the best. I just find it to be so I just find it to be so like quintessential Hepburn for me that I just naturally put her in the upper tier for that. Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. It's possibly like her defining role, isn't it? It is quintessentially Hepburn, but there's something about quintessential Hepburn that rubs me up the wrong way. So it's when she's not quintessential that I like her more.
Yeah. Let's move on to Broadway Melody of 1936, even though it comes out in 1935. So, anyway.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it?
So,
tell me your thoughts before I tell you mine.
Well, you know how people say, like, oh, whatever happened to Hollywood? Totally out of original ideas. Well, I mean, just know that Hollywood has been all about sequels and reboots and remakes from the very beginning, because here we have the Broadway Melody of 1936, which comes after the Best Picture winner Broadway Melody. Eventually we get Broadway Melody of 1938 and Broadway Melody of 1940. So there's not really any connective tissue between them as far as characters, but sort of just an excuse to do a bunch of different song and dance numbers and very, very loosely hang a plot around them. And I'm being very generous when I say plot here. So it's barely even worth mentioning, but for those who are interested, essentially it's about a woman who reunites with a childhood sweetheart who's now a Broadway producer, and she's trying to get him to put her in a show. There are some really fun, entertaining performances here. Eleanor Powell has a few really good dance numbers. Jack Benny has a fun role as like a gossip columnist. For me, this is honestly completely forgettable, just in terms of a film. There's a plot line with a guy who's an expert in snoring, and there's this recurring gag where he's just like demonstrating the various types of snores, and I'm like, what are we doing here? What is happening? Having said that, the performances are great, and it is quite entertaining on that level at times. I just do not really get much of this in terms of a story. So, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I loved it.
There you go.
I can't say how much I love this. Of course, it's rubbish. I'm not defending it anyway. It's just an excuse to put on numbers, isn't it? But my argument is always in this kind of thing, and this is what they did so brilliantly back then. You know, yes, it's the storyline's rubbish, but you've got Eleanor Powell tap dancing. Who doesn't want to watch Eleanor Powell tap dancing? As far as I'm concerned, the greatest tap dancer in movie history. Doesn't get a due, obviously, because she's a woman, but is right up there, better than Astaire, if you ask me. Got Taylor just looking super hot, which he was. That's a lot more Taylor, just to look at him. Una Merkel's in there, and Una Merkel is always fantastic, isn't she? But the thing that left me most of all, and hold on, there's a question, isn't there? There's a question about this film. Yeah. That someone asked, and a particular performance in it.
Yeah.
I'll ask the question.
Yeah, Matthew Lucas said Buddy Ebsen dancing in a Mickey Mouse shirt in Broadway Melody of 1936. Great musical number or greatest musical number?
Possibly my favourite moment out of all the films I've watched from 1935. So weird. It's like so weird. It doesn't. It's really hard to explain how out of its time it feels. It does not in any way, shape, or form feel like something from a film in 1935. He's so clearly a really, really good dancer, but everything's wrong. His arms and his legs are just way too long, and he hits every beat spot on, but he always feels like he hasn't stopped moving. It's just so weird. Just go and track it down. I'm sure it's just on YouTube.
It is.
And this is not that I'm particularly familiar with it, but this is Buddy Epps was in the Beverly Hillbillies, wasn't he? So that's what people mostly know him from. But young, tall, skinny, gangly Buddy Ebsen is kind of weirdly hot.
I thought it was really adorable.
It was totally adorable. Lap this shit up. I just loved it.
Well, if nothing else from this movie, track down that number on YouTube to just watch that.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Ronaldo Sosa said, "How hot is Robert Taylor in Broadway Melody of 1936?" You already said it. He's hot.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Taylor isn't a good actor. He's not even a particularly good movie star, but he's just ridiculously good looking. And sometimes that's all you want in a 1930s movie star. Sometimes that's just enough. He wasn't there to emote, was he? He was there to stand next to whoever it was, stand next to Joan Crawford or whoever, and look very, very, very handsome, in which he does brilliantly. So well done to him.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, absolutely not.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Captain Blood. So we've got some overlap with Mutiny on the Bounty here. We've got Men at Sea, adventure film, and here we have Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland, classic pair, all about Dr. Blood, who is accused of treason, and he's sold off as a slave to Olivia de Havilland's character, and eventually he escapes with a big crew and goes off on a boat, and he becomes a pirate. So Errol Flynn, always kind of a fun, charismatic lead. Doesn't have the most depth as an actor, but sometimes that's fine for a movie like this. Watching this, you can really see the template for Pirates of the Caribbean, the first movie in that franchise. Lots of parallels there. I will say this movie is a little long feeling, because it's surprisingly talky for a movie of this nature, and I wish there was a little more swashbuckling, but for me, still fun to have just a straight-up action-adventure film that doesn't really try to be much more than what it is.
I mean, I actively disliked this.
Okay.
It feels really creaky in a way that some of the others, well, certainly compare it to Mutiny on the Bounty, it just feels really creaky. It feels quite cheap. The problem here for me, I'm glad this exists because it introduces you to Errol Flynn and it introduces you to Olivia de Havilland, which going forward was going to be a fantastic pairing, wasn't it? But this ain't it. This kind of feels like they were trying some things out here. I was not I just bored, basically. I didn't care about, as you said, there was not enough swashbuckling. It was very talky, didn't really make a lot of sense. I didn't really care what anyone was doing. Also, I think it's really important to note that Errol Flynn doesn't have a moustache in this film, which shows he's got a really, really thin top lip. And this is important stuff, yeah? Really thin top lip, so he's just not hot at all. Take it 3 years later and you get to like Robin Hood or something, and Errol Flynn is like the king of swashbuckling, isn't he? But here he's just like, it's just the start, yeah? Clearly someone said, Errol, mate, get a tash. Because, I just wasn't feeling this at all. I've got next to nothing to say about it.
That's fair. I will say that I hadn't seen this before and I was a bit disappointed overall. I certainly went into this with some high expectations, but
me too, yeah.
Didn't quite meet them. Well, you teed up our next question here beautifully. This is from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg. Do you prefer Captain Blood or The Adventures of Robin Hood?
Oh, well, it's no competition. I mean, one feels like this. It literally feels like an audition, for everyone involved.
That's true.
Of what could happen, when it's got almost exactly the same cast. It's got Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, and oh my God, how can I be totally blanking on this? What's going on with me? Who is in it? is Basil Rathbone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it's the same director as well, isn't it, Michael Curtiz? Yeah, it just feels just like an audition for what was to come. So it's not even close.
Agreed. Totally agreed. This is from Matthew Lucas. How did Michael Curtiz end up with a write-in nomination for Best Director for Captain Blood? It's listed as a nominee, but not an official nominee. Did the Academy just have no rules in 1935?
Basically. We kind of explained this earlier, didn't we? So in 34 and
yeah.
35, you were allowed to write in other people. They stopped it after this year because apparently he came second. But this is also a Warner Brothers film, isn't it? It must be, because it's got that cast, which are all Warner Brothers people. So there will be your answer. Jack Warner will have told everyone to vote for his nominee in the race. So yeah, that's what happened. Jack Warner told everyone to vote for Michael Curtiz.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is kind of that simple, I would say. I wouldn't say it's a big convoluted sort of answer as to why specifically this one, but you know.
But there's also just really weird things that goes on around this time, you know, when there's no kind of, now we have very sort of specific rules about stuff. We've got 12 Best Picture nominees, but only 3 Best Director nominees.
Yeah. And also, like, actor and actress are supposed to have 3 nominees, but there were ties. Yeah.
Which again suggests maybe the actual voting body was really small. Maybe there were very few people voting, which would account for why there were like lots of ties, wouldn't it?
This is from Ronaldo Sosa. I read that despite not being nominated in either category since write-in voting was allowed, Captain Blood was second in director and received more votes in screenplay than some of the actual nominees. If it was so liked, why couldn't it get nominated in the first place?
It's a very good question to which I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I will say sometimes there's in the nominations voting, sometimes things get overlooked. And suddenly Ben Affleck is not nominated for Argo, and you're like, uh-oh. Like, we screwed up somewhere, and we have to, fix our mistake here. Which I will say I'm glad that they did away with write-in nominees after this, because I feel like it just would have given the Academy so much of, like, having their cake and eating it too, of like, you know, the big public outcry over a certain person not being nominated and then being like, oops, sorry, we're gonna just write it in and pretend like it happened on the actual ceremony.
Yeah, and then here we are 85 years later with them actually pretending it did. You know, like if you actually look on the official records, these writing nominees are actually noted. At least on Wikipedia they put that it's not an official nominee even next to it. On the Academy website they don't. I think on the Academy website it actually says that Captain Blood had 5 nominations, which it did not have 5 nominations. I think it had 2, but like 3 other writing things got so many votes that actually sort of placed. Again, we can put this all down to Jack Warner. Jack Warner told everyone en masse at Warner Brothers to vote for the Warner Brothers films. So that's why I think Captain Blood is popping up all over the place.
Yeah, and this would just be a nightmare thinking about it. Going forward, if this continued, can't imagine what studios would have done.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to David Copperfield. So you thought we were done talking about Dickens adaptations after the 36th episode. Well, here we are again with David Copperfield, classic tale of an orphan boy growing up and falling in love. I have mixed feelings on this one, so I think the cast on the whole is really good. I actually like Freddie Bartholomew as young David here. W.C. Fields, fascinating performance. Basil Rathbone here again. Lionel Barrymore, Elsa Lanchester, great cast. But my favorite, and I tweeted this after I watched it last week, is Edna Mae Oliver, who I really didn't know very much before this, to be honest, but has been a really fun presence in some of the movies I've been watching lately.
Yeah.
She plays Betsy Trotwood here, his great aunt who hates men, and she's so wonderfully expressive and fun to watch. The film itself, I will say my interest kind of wanes after a while, but solid adaptation, even if it takes out a lot from the novel. Also, really great production design, costume design.
Yeah.
Very good production overall. Yeah.
You say she hates men, but more importantly, she hates donkeys. That's the
right. Yes.
That's the most important thing. Now, I saw the the recent Armando Iannucci version of this.
Ooh, yes.
And I don't know the book. I know of the book. I'm sure I haven't read it. I'm sure I haven't actually read it, so I wouldn't know the full story. But when I watched the Armando Iannucci recent version, I thought it was just kind of mad because Armando Iannucci had directed it. It's all that nonsense about donkeys and so much the kind of the really kind of weird and wonderful stuff in there. I just thought that was from him, and then you watch this and you think, no, this is from Dickens. So all that kind of madness that I'd assumed was kind of like a revisionist version turns out not to be at all. I absolutely love this. I loved this. So many great things in it. You're absolutely right about Edna May Oliver, the slam dunk Best Supporting Actress winner of that year, if indeed that award had been around. No doubt is there. The real revelation for me is Freddie Bartholomew, who I've always thought of as just an annoying child star. Do you know what I mean? And of the worst kind as well. That kind of like precocious, like just horrible. And I've only ever seen him, I think, in maybe Captain Courageous before. But he's great. He's really good. He's really good. He's a really good little actor. And he's not annoying, which is like rare, isn't it? So I was just really impressed with that. And this is definitely what I was talking about before, about when things are littered with those great character actors, where every little role, even if it's like 5 minutes, has got someone in who really makes a mark. So more than any other film here, that really, really stood out to me. It's just a delight to watch. There's always something interesting going on. And you're right, the production side is like astonishing. The production side is just genius. And there's things like, when they were, wasn't quite sure what was going on actually. They were rescuing people in a boat. And I sometimes look at some of the kind of special effects from these really early days, and they impress me more than any Avengers film does.
Because they're practical. Yeah,
absolutely. Because someone doing something amazing on a computer, I'm not knocking that at all. It's huge. It's huge talent to be able to do that. But that isn't the same with the actual nuts and bolts of actually putting a ship in what's probably a soundstage and a giant water tank, and then starting a storm and having people. It looks always really, really dangerous, doesn't it? And that happens a lot in Mutiny on the Bounty and in Captain
you're
Blood.
right.
There was a lot of it just looked really, really dangerous.
You're like concerned for the actors.
Absolutely, yeah, completely. How did they get this insured? They probably didn't. Yeah, so David Copperfield was just a delight as far as I was concerned, a real delight.
Yep. This is from Mark Lamb. If there were supporting Oscars, would W.C. Fields for David Copperfield been nominated?
Again, I'm going to say no for the reason I said earlier. W.C. Fields, although it's clearly a supporting role, was a big A-list star, and I'm not sure that either he or his studio would have wanted him to be put into a supporting role. He obviously is a supporting role, but as I say, it didn't quite work like that back then. So I think there's plenty of other people from that film who could have easily been put in supporting, but I'm not sure that they would have done that with him.
Yeah, he's also technically the first person on the poster, technically billed first, if you look at the big poster with all the names.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, which is interesting because most of the rest of it is, they kind of go off, they start off kind of alphabetical, but then they don't. Yes, I mean, he's the biggest star in there. I just don't think he would have been put in supporting.
Yeah, I agree, sadly, because I think he would have been a slam dunk in supporting actor.
100%.
If the rules were today what they would have been, I think easily. Probably could have won. Who knows?
100%.
Yeah. So, Ronaldo Sosa, do you think Edna May Oliver could have been nominated or won for David Copperfield if the supporting categories already existed? Yes.
Yes. And considering how many films we've watched from this year, so we could probably have a good idea of what the supporting nominees would have been. I can't see anyone who's even in competition. Can you?
Yeah. No, she's the one that stood out for me the most easily.
Yeah,
and I did take extra steps to look at at least the Best Picture nominees here. And no one comes close. All right. So let's talk about Les Miserables. Not a musical adaptation, just a straightforward adaptation of the Victor Hugo novel. Although there are quite a few changes, and it is significantly shortened from the very long book and everything that happens there. It's actually less than 2 hours, and that actually does serve the story well, in my opinion, even though there's still a lot going on. Frederick March playing Jean Valjean, and our old pal Charles Laughton here is Javert. And I think perfect roles for both of them, especially Charles Laughton. This being the first few years of the production code, there is some censorship happening here where we don't even have any mention of Fantine being a prostitute, I don't think. But, the story is still the story. The production design is, again, great, especially in the third act. And I'm just thinking of Jean Valjean carrying Marius through the sewer, lots of great individual scenes. Although I do think it can be a bit rushed, and it sacrifices quite a bit of stuff with, like, the revolutionary stuff and Fantine. But, yeah, I was expecting something a little duller than what we got here, which I think is a pretty solid adaptation.
I 100% agree. I'm very firmly of the opinion that the musical version of Les Miserables is one of the single worst films that's ever been made. Just
let alone nominated for Best Picture.
Oh my God, it's just jaw-dropping. We won't go into it now. Jaw-droppingly atrocious. I mean, I can't even tell you how much I hated that film. But this was great. It's like when you don't have Hugh Jackman singing in your face, like, for maudling, like, choral music for 3 hours, suddenly everything becomes a lot better. There's a lot of these. So, like, I would say Mutiny on the Bounty, Captain Blood, Lives of Bengal Lancer, Les Miserables are kind of big budget adventure films, almost kind of like the sort of the equivalent of the Avengers today. They're kind of like what it's interesting is that these sort of literary films were the big blockbusters of their day, which has gone out the window. We don't get films like this made much anymore, do we? Other than, like, to maybe win some Oscars. I just found it thoroughly entertaining, and I love the fact that they can condense that down to under 2 hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes, I don't know how many pages Les Miserables is. It's actually on I've never read it. It's actually on my bookcase. It's probably like 1,000 pages long, isn't it? Now, you're not telling me that 90% of that can go, which it did, and it's still great. So
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And the surprising thing for me is that Frederick March wasn't nominated. That feels really odd.
Yeah, I thought he was fantastic. I also thought Charles Laughton, if if Mutiny and the Bounty weren't there, I think he could have gotten in for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Possibly even for another one we'll talk about later. Yeah. But, great cast.
It feels weird because you're kind of at that time, Frederick March is kind of the Hollywood's premier actor, him and Paul Muni maybe. Here he is in a film that's nominated for Best Picture. It's got everything going for it as far as Oscar bait's concerned. It feels very strange that they managed to get 3 Mutiny on the Bounty people in there and he didn't make it. Just odd. It just feels strange.
This is from Glenda Miss Jackson If You Nasty. He's got another one for you that's probably pretty obvious. Les Miserables, 35 or 2012? I wonder.
I'll just say I don't really do reviews. Like I write about film, but I don't really do reviews. It's not really my forte. But my review of Les Miserables is actually on my profile of Letterboxd because it's just a huge long rant about how fucking terrible it is. So head over there if you want to know my feelings about it. The 2012 one, obviously. No competition as to which is the better.
Yes, 35 is the better one, even though I will say just in general, I do like the music, not necessarily that adaptation of that music, but I like this story with music, like the stage show. So,
yeah, I went to see it because when the film came out, it was still on in London at the time, so it was still showing in London, and I went to see it beforehand because I thought, I should see the proper stage show before I saw the film, and yeah, whatever. I was just noise, not down with it at all.
Yeah, it is entirely sung through, so it's just a lot. But yeah,
it's got no tunes. There's no variety in the music. In a great musical.
Excuse me, I dreamed a dream. Do you hear the people sing?
It's got, as far as I'm concerned, it's got one famous song in it, which is "I Dreamed a Dream," and the rest of it all just sounds the same to my ears. It's just people hollowing in what sounds like 18th century choral music or something. I just can't with it.
Well, there you go. All right, so let's move on to The Lives of the Bengal Lancer. So this is the one, honestly, I was most nervous about heading into this. Just looking at the title and the poster and the concept and the time period, I was just very prepared to cringe at something. Yeah, so it's the story of imperialists, where you are supposed to root for the imperialists and root against the actual natives who are fighting against the imperialism, which is tough. It's set during the British Raj, which is the British Crown rule of India, and it's about the men who are trying to defend against the uprising of the natives. What a concept. Gary Cooper is here playing the leader, of course. We also have Franco Tone here again, and Richard Cromwell. These are the three stars, and has its moments. There's a fun little snake charmer bit in this that's kind of amusing. There's some interesting dynamics about fathers and sons and like those kinds of relationships that are mildly engaging, but in general would not recommend. For what it's worth, also Adolf Hitler famously counted this as one of his favorite films, which I try not to count against my own feelings on the film, but I will just say that I'm not entirely surprised.
I mean, I'd have little to nothing to say about it. It was just there. I think I said, like, men being men. I just don't care about any of this.
Men being men, yes.
Any of it, you know?
Yeah.
It's just people riding and shooting and kidnapping, and just, I did not care in the slightest. The one thing that did sort of stand out, there's this, like, cringy brown face moment, which isn't really brown face, because it's not, no, hang on. There's two roles, I think, which are white people playing like Indians, which are like obviously unacceptable, whatever. But it happened at the time, you know. That's just how things were done, isn't it? But there's a hilariously kind of cringy moment where you have Gary Cooper and Franco Tone actually sort of blacking themselves up and putting turbans on their head to try and like infiltrate this city. And they just look ridiculous. And the idea that they weren't going to get immediately caught is just like so unbelievable. And then hilariously, they do get unbelievably caught because they don't look remotely like Indian people. So, yeah, it's just kind of tragic.
Yeah, I think in parts it's a good looking film, at least with some of the set pieces, but substance wise, not a fan.
We should just say there is a good scene where Gary Cooper has his top off, so it's got that going for it.
That's true. I remember that. That's something. Giving the girl something. Yeah, not a fan of Gary Cooper, as has been outlined many times on this show. So I struggle.
Oh, you're
with
not?
This
I
one.
love Gary Cooper. Really?
Yeah. No.
I love Gary Cooper. I think he's great.
Okay.
We'll just leave that.
I think he is sometimes good. And that's that. We didn't get any questions about it. Not entirely surprised. Again, it's one of the ones here that I feel is the most dated and would not recommend. So I don't want to spend time on it. Let's move on to... Oh boy. Well, I just saw what we're moving on to next, and buckle up, folks. A Midsummer Night's Dream. So, much like we have another Dickens adaptation to talk about this year, we also have yet another Shakespeare adaptation. Oh boy. So really interesting how much crossover there is here between years in the 30s. Like there's lots of, I don't know, like the same kinds of films being adapted. But this is very unlike most of the Shakespeare adaptations that I've seen from Best Picture nominees, at least, because this one at least is just like totally going for it. And I don't know whether I feel good or bad about it, but I do weirdly respect how much they are willing to almost put off the audience with what it's doing. I read your Letterboxd review, which is just an automatic all-timer for me of Letterboxd reviews that I've seen, but I would love for you to just get into your thoughts on A Midsummer Night's Dream here.
I hate Shakespeare. I just can't with Shakespeare. I just can't. As I'm English, I grew up like this. All during school, we just did Shakespeare. For our exams, we had to study Shakespeare. And I've always had the same problem, which is firstly, can you just say what you mean? It's like, why is everything taking, like, why are you taking 10 times as long to just say no? You know, just like get on with it for starters. This particular, it's just bonkers, you know, but not in a good way. It's boring. It's ugly. Every performance is terrible. It's really, really, no, hang on, I should say Jimmy Cagney's quite good. But other than that, every performance is terrible. It goes on and on and on. It never ends. And it's just a mess, an absolute mess. I again vaguely knew the plot, kind of. But even then, it's more boring. The plot's more boring than I imagined. I couldn't with this at all. As it went on, it just got worse and worse and worse.
For those who don't know, this is the one where a bunch of people head into the woods, which is full of fairies and various creatures, and they basically get a little sprinkling of magic dust that makes them all super horny and just lusting after each other. And at one point, someone from another group gets transformed where their head turns into a donkey head. Hijinks ensue.
But there's also some framing advice about a wedding, and then there's like a band of travelling actors who are rehearsing a play.
Right.
What is going on? You've just introduced, in the first, 15 minutes, they must introduce 40 characters, you know, and then you're supposed to sort them out. And it's
a lot to keep up with. Yeah.
Just a lot. It's just, I hated it so much.
Yeah. Well, I think I perhaps liked it more than you, even though I don't think that this is anywhere near great art, quite honestly. I guess this is one where also I really wish it was in color, because it's such a flamboyant, kind of over the top film that the black and white, I don't know if it really suits it, but somewhat interesting work with the layering of visual effects. I don't know if that necessarily holds up very much, but I was certainly captivated by what they were going for with some of the stuff in the woods. This is also the first role for Olivia de Havilland, and I think she's very sweet here. She doesn't get a whole lot to do, but great screen presence. And we also have Mickey Rooney, who's playing a very... I don't even know what the word is for it, because I want to say irritating, but I want to even take it a step further.
Oh, it's way more than irritating.
Just grating obnoxiousness turned up to 11 at all times.
It's like he's in some drama group exercise where he's being a chimpanzee or something. So imagine Mickey Rooney doing a drama exercise where he's being a chimpanzee while spouting Shakespeare. I mean, it's just... what on earth are you doing? And you can't believe that no one told him, Mickey, mate, just tone it down a bit. You can't believe he got away with that. You know, hell, I mean, bless him, he's only 14 or 15 in it, so I don't blame him at all. This is whoever's, there's kind of two directors, wasn't there? But this is their fault. But
yeah,
someone needed to tell him to just dial it down. What you were saying about the colour, I thought exactly that watching. I thought maybe this would work in colour. But then I thought, can you imagine how garish it would be in colour?
Yeah, that would... I mean, I don't know if I would want it in color in 1935, necessarily.
No.
But, you know, I think this story suits something that is very flamboyant and colorful. But, yeah, and also Mickey Rooney, he has this scream that he does, which is just, piercing. And it's so upsetting that I almost did want to turn it off at various points, because I was just what are we doing?
He's doing that thing you sometimes see where he's giving a performance in a totally different film to everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's it happens sometimes these performances, get a lot of praise. I always think of Renee Zellweger in Cold Mountain, who's clearly in a totally different film to everybody else. But his style of acting is not the style of acting that anyone else is doing in the film. I mean, Dick Powell is also atrocious. Dick Powell, I don't know what you think he's going to jump into a dance routine at any moment. It's so weird what he's doing. It's not Shakespeare acting. It's just a mess. I hated this film with an absolute passion.
There you go. I feel like from scene to scene, I didn't know how I was feeling about when I was watching it. It almost went around to being so aggressive and in your face and bad that I almost turned around to just respecting it by the end. Just again, you're just totally going for it, and I respect it in a weird way. But at least it's more engaged. It was more engaging to me than some of like Shakespeare tragedy adaptations. So there's something to that.
Yeah, completely. I kind of think if it had been made in the 70s, it would be like a camp classic. If it was in gaudy Technicolor, and it had like all these famous people basically making fools of themselves, it would be a camp classic. Because it's old and black and white, it doesn't kind of have that same camp appeal, does it?
Yeah. All right, this is from Ian Blacklock. What are your overall thoughts on Midsummer Night's Dream's Oscar win for cinematography, since it banned write-in votes for future Oscar ceremonies?
I'm going to say what I've said a lot of the time. It's Warner Brothers, so there's your answer.
The answer to all of these write-in questions is Warner Brothers. Jack Warner.
Jack Warner decided he wanted some Oscars, so he told everyone to vote for them. If there was a smaller voting pool, that's what happened. And that also shows the ridiculous nature of write-in votes, doesn't it? No one thought it was good enough, and then enough people thought it was good enough, so it just doesn't make any sense. And
enough people thought it was good enough that it should win over the actual nominees.
Exactly. Which clearly makes no sense. So, yeah, it was obviously for the best that they banned write-ins, and if that was the catalyst for doing so, then well done.
Yeah, there you go. Couldn't have said it better myself. This is from Catherine Short. A Midsummer Night's Dream is often credited as the film that turned Mickey Rooney into a star. What do you think of his crazed performance as Puck, and do you prefer him in this earlier phase of his career? Well, we already covered that, but what stage of his career do you like Mickey Rooney, if you do at all?
So I actually, funnily enough, like just a few weeks back, I wrote a piece for the Film Experience about Mickey Rooney and about how he was kind of one of the first movie stars I ever knew. I'll direct you to the website. It's a kind of long story. Look at the Film Experience, my piece about Mickey Rooney. I won't tell you the whole story now. But he was one of the first movie stars I ever knew because he was in Pete's Dragon. And as a kid, I was totally obsessed with Pete's Dragon. So him and Shelley Winters were like big stars to me when I was like 5. Mickey Rooney is a really, really good actor. He's like a really good showbiz professional. He can turn his hand to anything. He can act, he can dance, he can sing, he can do magic tricks. It doesn't matter what. He's just got show business running through his veins, and I very much appreciate that. He's dreadful here, absolutely dreadful, isn't he? But I think I like old Mickey Rooney. He's a really good actor. In like his older years, he won a Emmy for a TV film called Bill, I think it's called, in like 1981 or 1982, and he plays like a mentally handicapped man, and he's amazing. He's fantastic in it, and it's really weird when you think he's this child star who is kind of like, hey kids, let's put on a show, and he's kind of quintessentially Hollywood and that. But if he'd actually been given those opportunities to be a proper serious actor all these years, I think he probably could have been.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have sort of interacted with his films a little bit with Best Picture, even though it didn't seem like there was a whole lot there. But I thought he was very good in Boys Town. I think he's giving a lot of energy to that role. What's the one where he's like a hometown hero?
Human Comedy?
Yes, Human Comedy. Yeah, I like him, and I think he can carry films very well because of the energy that he gives, and he has a sincerity to him that works in certain roles. Sometimes he just is given no direction and he could just do whatever he wants and it goes off the rails. Like Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah. Oh, don't know. I can't even start. I always when people talk about like Black or Yellowface or something, I always say this kind of, it goes from naught to Mickey Rooney, because he's like the very worst example ever, isn't it, of that horrendous. He's definitely someone who needs reining in. He's definitely someone who needs a strong director to be like, chill out. But he's great. So he's my winner in 1956 for Best Supporting Actor for The Bold and the Brave. He was nominated, and I'd give him the win that year. I think he's a really, really good, capable actor when given the chance. The problem was for him when he was a child star, and it's sort of hard to imagine now what a huge star he was. He was the biggest star in the world at the end of the 30s, beginning of the 40s, like a huge box office star. But once he became like a proper adult, he was really hard to cast because he's only 5'2", and what do you do with him? He's not like a proper leading man. He wasn't like a proper singer dancer. He's kind of odd looking. What do you do with him? He's a huge star, but he's in a character actor's body, and they never quite worked out what to do with him. So he went back to he did theatre, he did radio. He did everything and anything because he could. But it's when you look back now and see what a huge star he was, and he managed to carry his career on for he died when he was in his 90s, and he'd been a star since he was 15. I mean, it's kind of astonishing, really, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely need to see more of his work, to be quite honest. But yeah.
It's especially interesting when you think of there was loads of child stars around that time. Freddie Bartholomew was one we were talking about earlier, and Shirley Temple and Deanna Durbin and Judy Garland, of course. Yeah, all at the same time, all huge stars. But most of their careers didn't carry on even into the 40s. Most of them were kind of like gone by the mid-40s, and others like Judy were dead, basically. So the fact he had problems, but he was a real survivor who carried on. And you can only do that if you're talented. You can't carry on a 70, 80-year career in every form possible of entertainment if you're not actually extremely talented, which he clearly was. He's just sometimes maybe a bit too talented. He needs some, needs a firm hand.
Right. This is from Jackson DeStefano. Which of the Shakespeare adaptations you've watched for this was your favorite? And then in parentheses, he has Midsummer Night's Dream, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, West Side Story, Henry V, Julius Caesar. I mean, of those, it's a pretty clear West Side Story. I think that's, head and shoulders above any of those other straightforward adaptations.
Not Othello. Are you telling me it's not Othello?
Definitely not Othello, and specifically not the Laurence Olivier version. That's for damn sure.
Yeah,
I mean, you hate all Shakespeare, so I don't know if you have any
even
preference.
Going down, when I've been going down to the 50s and 60s, I've only skipped a couple of films, and one of them was the 56 version of Richard III. In fact, I own it on DVD. I can see it on my shelf over there. I just couldn't. I just hadn't got the strength. So
you physically can't. Yeah.
I just can't. One day maybe.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep it moving here. We still got 3 more Best Picture nominees. Naughty Marietta. First of all, fantastic title. So it's based on a operetta. This is a musical starring Jeanette MacDonald as a princess who disguises herself as the titular Naughty Marietta to get out of an arranged marriage. So she goes off and finds love. So I think, regardless of quality, this is a prime example of a movie that really benefited from having 12 Best Picture slots, because I don't even think that this would get into a field of 10 normally. It only has one other nomination, which is for sound, which it does end up winning. But for me, this is a relatively minor film compared to some of the rest of these. Jeanette MacDonald, really fun role. I don't quite think it's like an Oscar nomination worthy performance, but she's giving it her all, and I like her screen presence. And it does have a good cast: Nelson Eddy, Frank Morgan, Elsa Lanchester. A little forgettable, but perhaps this is known for originating a song that is heard in Young Frankenstein, which is Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life. So there's that.
This was a big surprise to me.
Okay.
Because ever since I've been following the sort of classic got a golden age Hollywood, that's kind of my thing. Ever since I've been following it, I've always known about Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy and how they did these sort of operettas. And as it came to watch this, I suddenly realised I don't think I've actually ever seen one. So I can tell you lots about both of them, but I've never actually seen them on screen. The only thing I've seen her in is she's got a kind of a more straight role in San Francisco, and I probably saw that 25 years ago. So it's not like I have a lot of things to say about her. I'd always assumed that she was kind of a very sort of stiff, prim and proper opera singer who was sort of shoehorned into films because of her voice, and then they built some frivolous nonsense around her about European princesses and castles and stuff. And she came on screen at the beginning, and I was suddenly like, oh, she's great. She's great. I was really, really impressed with her. She's gorgeous, and she's alive, in a way that I didn't think she was. I just assumed she was really wooden. She's really charming. I kind of wanted to take her out of this and put her in a in a screwball comedy with William Powell or something. You know, she felt like she could do that.
Yeah.
So I was actually really surprised, and then I was especially surprised because the start is exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was big dresses and crinolines and, you know, European setting and royalty, etc. And then she gets on a boat and travels to like New World America to meet. It was just very like disorientating. That is not what I expected. It was also a lot tougher than I was expected. At one point, a pirate shoots an old woman in the face.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's going on here? That's not what I was expecting.
I will give it that. It's very unpredictable, which I like.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it by the end, it just becomes, I didn't even understand. The last scene makes no sense at all. They've been captured, and then they haven't been captured, and they're going off in a cart. I was like, what? Felt there was a scene missing or something. But it kind of fell to pieces as it went on. But I was genuinely quite impressed with this. I'd like to see some of her other things. It just took me by surprise. It's their first film together, Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald. And if that's the start, I'd be really interested to see what happened on. Maybe it became more formulaic afterwards, but I was pretty surprised. I kind of liked it.
Yeah, I'll be talking about more Jeanette MacDonald as we go earlier in Oscar history with like 1 Hour with You and The Love Parade. So stay tuned. I don't have much to add, to be honest, on this film. I found it a little bit too forgettable to have other thoughts. And we didn't get any questions about it. Oh dear. All right. Ruggles of Red Gap. So we've got a comedy here that only gets the Best Picture nomination and nothing else. Perhaps another one that got very lucky to have 12 nominees. But once again, we have Charles Laughton. So the third of his 3 films that got Best Picture nominations. And he's playing a British butler who gets traded away to a rather unsophisticated American family. But he soon starts to appreciate his new freedom and this new way of being in the world where people genuinely respect him. So what are your thoughts on Ruggles of Red Gap?
This is one of those films which I know the title of. I kind of vaguely knew something what it was about, but I'd never seen it before. And it's really quite charming. It's kind of a screwball, isn't it? But without any of the usual trappings of a screwball. So it kind of feels... You kind of feels familiar in some ways, but the setting is very much different than usual. Again, this is like I was saying about David Copperfield. It's just littered with all those fantastic character actors. Mary Bolan, who's kind of lead actually, but Mary Bolan is fantastic in this as the one who sort of whisks him away to the west. She's kind of a Dalwedger. I'm not sure how you would extract. She's kind of a society lady, isn't she? A society lady in the New West. It's just really charming. I think it loses steam a bit halfway through. Charles Laughton is great. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. There's so much about these 30s films that I just find charming in a way I don't as like Hollywood continues on. You know, so much about this. All of these films. There's always something to love in all of them. Almost all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one thing I will say about this is it's a very loud movie where we have characters that are just doing a lot of yelling or laughing or just making these big proclamations, which can sometimes be a lot. But at its core, I think this is a very sweet movie, just about, acceptance and finding your way in a new culture while still trying to remain true to yourself. There's a lovely little scene where he's reciting the Gettysburg Address and everyone's just totally in awe of him. This is another great performance by Charles Laughton, and he wins the New York Film Critics Award for this and Mutiny on the Bounty. I don't know, I guess his performance in Les Mis wasn't quite as good to them, but still, MVP of this year. Hard to argue that, but
Absolutely.
If, like I said, if Mutiny on the Bounty wasn't here, then he could have gotten in for this and contended. Yeah.
That thing when you say about the Declaration of Independence, is it that he recites?
The Gettysburg Address.
Gettysburg Address, that's right. You just can't do that sort of thing these days. It's like there's an sincerity about that. Which
it's true. It's so earnest. Yeah.
So earnest, absolutely. And earnest is just something it's really, really hard to do these days without us all rolling our eyes. But it just works beautifully, and you can do that thing, that quick switch from like sort of real comedy to like real sincerity, and there's just a a skill there that I don't know when it got lost, but you just can't do that anymore. And I just kind of love that kind of thing. It's from a book, I think, or maybe a series of books, and it's quite clear that the narrative is not the strongest. You know, it's kind of like, it's very episodic, isn't it? So it sort of jumps around.
Yeah.
And it's very hard. I'd be very, very hard pressed to explain the actual plots to anybody, because it's more kind of like a series of different events. But yeah, just all in all, with that great supporting cast, and with just everyone kind of like raising their game, I just love this kind of thing. It's not my favourite film, but I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah. Two people asked the same question here, so I'll just combine them. This is from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg and Trip Burton. Both of them asked us to give our favorite performance of the three of Charles Laughton, which one we would have nominated it for.
Interesting. I would go with this one, Ruggles of Red Gap. It feels like a departure. The other two feel very much Charles Laughton-y, very much like playing the villain, playing like the hardened. They're very similar, those two, the other two roles, aren't they? So this one, so it was a real kind of refreshing, because you don't really think of him as like a comedic actor as such. I mean, he does appear in comedies, but you kind of more think of him as his sort of severe characters. And he's really slim in this as well, which is really noticeable. He's really kind of like he's not like the big guy he is in a lot of his roles. That was kind of surprising. The only thing that was off-putting to me was his accent. Now, unless you're British, you probably wouldn't know what he was doing there, but he's got like a working class northern accent that just drifts all over the place. I don't quite know where he was from, but I don't know what the accent he was going for, but it kind of came and went throughout the whole film. But no, I think this was my favourite one of the three.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most different between the three of them. I think I just sort of prefer him on Mutiny on the Bounty in general, just because I find that character to be a lot more engaging, I suppose, and he's just giving a lot to that. And so I would say he got the right nomination, but again, Ruggles of Red Gap would have been a fantastic nomination for him as well. And Les Mis, and I think they're all great. They're all great. So
he actually was born in North Yorkshire, which is the accent he was doing. So I'm not quite sure what was going on there, because it was all over the place.
Yeah. Let's get to our final Best Picture nominee. Whew. All right.
Woohoo.
Top Hat. So, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers. For me, this is much better than Swing Time, which I mentioned on the 36th episode. This is the film that originated Cheek to Cheek, one of my favorite American standards. And the film is, as you can imagine, all about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers falling in love and singing about it and dancing about it. And there's comic misunderstandings, which is all just magical stuff. For me, it's the kind of pure joy that can honestly just, this is going to sound cheesy, but it almost brings me to tears sometimes with just how warm of an experience it can be. And I like that this also has a really good ensemble cast around them. Helen Broderick, I really love here.
Yeah.
Edward Everett Horton, Eric Rhodes, Eric Blore. It's very sharp, very witty. Big fan, just very rewatchable, and definitely deserves to be on the AFI Top 100 and replace Swing Time. There you go.
Okay, I was a bit surprised here, because I don't think that sounds remotely cheesy when you say about can bring you to tears. It's exactly the sort of thing that would bring me to tears, 100%. It's also a bit like I was saying earlier about sort of special effects these days. I know they do nothing for me at all. I can appreciate the craft without like caring. But to me, Fred and Ginger dancing is a special effect. You know, that's to me is jaw dropping. that transports me away to somewhere that I don't. It's not. It takes you away from real life entirely. You know, to watch Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dance is totally could bring me to tears, 100%.
It's magic.
It's just, it's magic. Exactly. It's exactly what it is. And what is so brilliant about it is the amount of hard work it takes to make it look that simple. They just look like they're floating on air. They're totally in sync with each other. That it's the quintessential kind of Hollywood magic, you know. So completely love all of that stuff. I just found this script to be so woefully thin that it kind of dragged everything else down. If you're going to do like a it's kind of like a mix-up, isn't there? Like one person thinks someone else's if you're going to do that, you need to introduce proper reasons why this isn't all sorted out in the first 5 minutes. and there's no good reason whatsoever why this isn't sorted out the first 5 minutes. And so we spent 90 minutes with people just acting stupidly, really, which is a real shame because everything else about it I love. You know, the sets are magnificent, the music's magnificent, the dance is magnificent, but just the plot was so paper thin that I just couldn't quite get over that.
Yeah. I get what you're saying there. I think sometimes I do just get taken away by just the magic they're able to produce, and all in one take, you know. It's not like we're doing cutaways and like close-ups or anything that would hide someone else's talent in a modern day sort of musical 100%. Sequence, you know.
When you think of like modern musicals, so one thing more than anything else that annoys me about modern musicals is when they hire people who can't sing and dance and then just cover it up with editing. I just find it baffling, you know. It's like neither Fred Astaire or Ginger Rogers are the best singers, but they're more than adequate, and it's made up with everything else they've got, you know, which is charm and the dancing ability. When you put Emma Stone in basically a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers film, and she's fine, she's a really good actress, but like it's so clear that she's not a singer or a dancer and doesn't have that real fluidity, you know, that you need to make it work properly. I just find that really frustrating, and there's clearly so many great singers, dancers, and actors, sort of triple threats out there, that they continuously do this, put people who are not properly talented enough to pull that off.
Yeah, no, it's true. And not that this is an example because La La Land was an original musical, but like you see this a lot with when they bring musical adaptations to movies, you know, a lot of the sort of Broadway cast just gets cast aside and they just go for movie stars, which some of that discussion was had with The Prom, which is coming out very soon, where they just like totally replace this Broadway cast that is totally willing and able to be in this show and have that talent, but they go for people who are mediocre to good singers and maybe a few dancers, but it's just, you know, yeah, it's a shame. I would agree.
I mean, I don't actually mind bringing stars in. I think that's what stars are for. You know, I think that that you're just transporting a hit Broadway show onto film and not putting any stars in it is almost like a waste. It's like, who's going to go and see that? You know, at the end of the day, they want to make money with it, don't they? And if you put Meryl Streep in it, you're going to make more money. But Meryl Streep can sing, and she's a star.
Yes, true.
You know, it's when you put Johnny Depp in Sweeney Todd. And Into the Woods. He did
and Helena Bonham Carter.
Well, and he's like terribly limited vocal range. He's so clearly being put through like a million filters to make it work. I just find that weird. There's so many movie stars out there who can sing, you know. And we're really waiting for that Jake Gyllenhaal musical, aren't we? Sunset Boulevard, really. Sunset
Boulevard. That's the role for him.
Yeah,
that's the role for him. That's the role for Glenn Close. Let's
absolutely.
Get that train rolling.
Totally.
Yes. Okay. This is from Glenda Miss Jackson. If You Nasty, is Top Hat the most deserving of Fred Astaire's led musicals to earn a Best Picture nomination?
I'm going to have to fess up and say, despite my decades-long adoration of Golden Age Hollywood, when it came to this, I suddenly realised I don't know what Astaire and Rogers films I'd seen. I assumed I'd seen Top Hat, and then I started watching it, though I have not seen this. I think, you know, when you've seen so many clips and you're so aware of who someone is and what they've done, and then you realise that, have I actually seen this, or have I just seen all the dance numbers on like? So I have seen some. I've definitely seen Flying Down to Rio. I've definitely seen maybe Swing Time or Follow the Fleet, but they're kind of the same, aren't they? Which is was one of their criticisms. I think they both criticised this film. I think the criticism at the time from critics was that the script was basically a retread of previous ones. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question because my knowledge there has, unfortunately, I've noticed, is incomplete.
That's fine. I can't say that I have seen all of these either, but Top Hat for me has a special place in my heart. So yeah, I would say happy that it was nominated, and I guess of them, probably my favorite and / best. So there you go.
What I discovered a lot watching all these films was there's so many things I'm now going to go off and do. There's so much stuff I was like, oh my god, I've realised I haven't quite actually caught up with that. So there's a lot of things I've got to stop watching the 50s. It's your fault. I've got to stop watching the 50s and go back down to the 30s.
I'm sorry / you're welcome.
Can I just very quickly just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I loved Eric Rhodes. Eric Rhodes plays like the
yes,
Italian designer who's clearly gay. They don't say it, but there's so many moments where it's just clear. At one point, he comes rushing out into the hallway and says to the hotel management, "There's a man in my bed."
Yes, I remember that. I love that.
And he says something brilliant like, he says at one point, "No woman is ever going to wear my dresses again." Of course, he has to get married, so we know he's not, but he clearly is. It was so good.
Well, yeah. All right. Let's see. So some of these questions are a little general, but Best Picture cast says, which movies in this lineup are still worth watching for the casual viewer today? So we sort of obviously talked about all of them, and you can parse through our thoughts on that, but most of the ones at the top are some of my faves that we talked about. Alice Adams, Mutiny on the Bounty, The Informer, certainly, David Copperfield.
Yeah, they're the top four. I think they're clearly the best four. I was just showing Broadway Melody of 36, just for, if you wanted to see like a quintessential 30s musical, hey, let's put on a show kind of thing, where the thin plot, the fantastic musical numbers, the weirdness of some of it, the brilliant talent on display. It's basically just a way to give people opportunity to show off their talent, isn't it? So there's something about that I just love. But yeah, you're right. There's those 4 to 5 are the definite ones to check out.
And if you're totally just sick, watch A Midsummer Night's Dream. I want to give me your thoughts on it. And
I'm just gonna, I just pulled this up because you mentioned it, and I was trying to remember what it was I'd said. I'm just going to very quickly just read what I said about Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah.
Oh yes. Okay. You have the floor.
Okay, I'm just going to read it. I'm reminded that time I took a really trippy E in a nightclub. I was thoroughly enjoying myself until my brother told me we were in hell and everyone turned green and had horns. The boy I was snogging turned into a cartoon camel. We fled the place thinking we were being pursued by devils. I thought I was dead for 2 days. This film is worse.
Wow. Thank you for that reading.
It's true.
I mean, yeah. I don't have anything to add to that. That's just a masterpiece. So we kind of already touched on these, but Eowyn Daly and Kevin Clowder both just wanted us to talk about any supporting performances we wanted to highlight that obviously couldn't have gotten nominated. Edna May Oliver and W.C. Fields, I suppose. Not that he would have been in supporting, but supporting in my eyes. And then like Fred Stone and Alice Adams, maybe even Hattie McDaniel.
So funny you said Fred Stone. I literally, as you said that, I just pulled him up on Wikipedia because I was just checking that's who it was. Yeah, he's my total. He would be my best supporting actor of the year, definitely.
Yeah. Helen Broderick in Top Hat, I also like. So.
Yeah, I also love Mary Boland in Ruggles of Red Gap.
Yes.
Who's fantastic.
Yeah,
there's so much to choose from this year, actually. I'm sure, to be honest, a couple of those really drippy girls would have got in. Your Maureen Sullivans and your who else was sort of really drippy and things. Probably some of the girls from Les Mis, your Fantine or your whatever the other Eponine. Yeah, something like that. So I'm sure they always like an ingenue, don't they, in the supporting categories? Oh, yeah. So I'm sure something like that would have got in. But there's so much to choose from these films. There's so much depth of the casting. It's been so well thought out, and so many great people have been put into just the tiniest roles. You mentioned Elsa Lanchester earlier, who is in a couple of the films, but in David Copperfield, she literally plays like W.C. Fields' maid or something. She's in it for maybe like 3 minutes, and you're just like, that's Elsa Lanchester. She literally was the Bride of Frankenstein that year, and and here she is playing like she's in it for, she doesn't really say anything. She would have got 3 lines, doesn't she? And yet someone of her quality is playing such a tiny role, and that kind of really says it all about the casting back then.
It sure does. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's that on the 12 Best Picture nominees. So we're already well over 2 hours, so let's get to our should have been a contender segment. These are other films not nominated for Best Picture from 1935 that we just wanted to highlight here. So Baby Clyde, do you have a few you want to just run through real quick?
So my number one favorite film of that year, and it probably was never going to be nominated, so it's not like it was snubbed or anything, but it's certainly, I think, the real quality of 1935 is the film I just mentioned, The Bride of Frankenstein. Which is, I mean, I'd never seen it before, and I suddenly, like maybe a couple of years back, I watched it for the first time, and it was just so good. And I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be creaky, as so many films from back then can be, and it just isn't. It's kind of mesmerising. It's such a good film, and I was kind of shocked that the actual Bride of Frankenstein is only in it like really, really briefly at the end. I thought it was all about him. It's not. But yeah, that's a fantastic film. There was others that I've seen, but that's such a long time ago I can't remember too much about them. But that it feels odd they're not represented at all. So you think that like Greta Garbo's Anna Karenina, which seems like a slam dunk Best Actress nomination apart from anything else,
and
it's
like she was expected to get the nomination, but it didn't happen. Yeah,
it's a real prestige picture. It's got an A-list cast. Apparently made lots of money. So it's just weird that's not there. It feels like the sort of thing that definitely would be. Also, Irene Dunne in Magnificent Obsession. Irene Dunne is one of my all-time favourite actresses. And that, funnily enough, with Irene Dunne, she's got so many of her films, because she's not that famous these days, and she was a huge star back in the 30s and 40s. And she kind of got forgotten somewhere along the way. But so many of her films got remade later on, including, of course, Magnificent Obsession, which we all know is that Jane Wyman film from 1954. So a lot of the reason I think she's not so well remembered is because the famous version of her film doesn't star her. But she seems like someone who should have been in there. And then there's a film, what's it called? The Whole Town's Talking, which is a great Jean Arthur film, and I absolutely love Jean Arthur. Again, one of my all-time favourites. Which is, it's with Edward G. Robinson, isn't it?
Yep.
Which is just a really kind of great early screwball comedy, which you considering the year before was the Have One Night One, and this year there's nothing that kind of represents it in this lineup, is there? So you would have thought that maybe something like that could have snuck in, but it didn't. But yeah, just they're three films I either think should have been, or I absolutely love that should have maybe been represented in some way.
Yeah, very good. I want to just talk about A Night at the Opera, which is a Marx Brothers film.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is the first one after Zeppo left to pursue other things. So it's just the three. And this is another, absurdist comedy, but one with a little more structure to it and more of like a concrete plot than things like Duck Soup. There's a bunch of different subplots to it, but definitely the same classic Marx Brothers humor. There's a scene where everyone's on a cruise ship and a bunch of them are just piling into one small room. That's fun. The scene at the end that's just like a total free-for-all where they've completely sabotaged this opera. Really fun, just like madcap stuff. It's not as funny as some of their other films for me, but still extremely enjoyable. I also, even though I don't recommend this film necessarily, think we need to talk about it because we haven't yet, but Dangerous. So
I didn't know where that was going.
Yes, because Bette Davis is our Best Actress winner. We cannot just ignore the fact that Bette Davis won an Oscar this year and just not talk about it. So I do not think that this should have been more of a contender by any means, but I wanted to mention it. Her first of two Oscars, and this is an example of a film that would probably be completely forgotten if not for the lead performance at the center of it. So she's playing an actress who it's kind of a fading star, and then there's this convoluted plot where an architect saw her playing Juliet in a performance of Romeo and Juliet, and that somehow made him want to become an architect. I really got lost on whatever the connection was there, but he also has a fiance, but then he falls in love with Bette Davis's character. The complications ensue. Very bland movie. It's also very short. It's only 70 something minutes, but at the same time feels a little long, which is not great. Yeah, I think the cast around Bette Davis is not good. I think Franchot Tone is fine, but bland. Barely has any chemistry with her. The actress playing his fiance is bad. And Bette Davis, this is definitely not one of the roles I would have given her an Oscar for, and even she feels the same way about that. This was famously a makeup win after the previous years of Human Bondage, losing for that. I feel like this is the kind of role that she could just sort of do in her sleep, and I don't know if that's a good thing, personally. What are your thoughts on this performance?
I have always had Bette Davis as my number one worst performance ever to win Best Actress.
Wow.
And she's been there like 20 odd years as my number one. I rewatched it like half last night, half this morning, and it's not that bad. I just remembered her as being like really, really over the top. You know when Bette Davis is at her worst, when she's like projecting to like the back seats, and it's not quite as bad as I'd remembered. It's not good, but it's just such a nothing film, and you're absolutely right. We would not remember this in the slightest if she hadn't won the Oscar for it. I think she had 5 films out that year, and there's no reason why this should be the one that she won the Oscar for, I'm very much of the opinion that she's terrible in of Human Bondage, so I don't even think she deserved to make up for the year before. It's a real shame to me. This happens a lot when someone wins early for the wrong thing, and then it messes up like the trajectory going forward, not just for them, but for other people, So she won in 38 deservedly, but then she had that big string of 39, 40, 41, 42, and 44 she was nominated in. And there's at least a couple there that she should have won for, which she probably would have if she hadn't won already. Then, of course, there's All About Eve, which, again, she's not my winner that year, but it would have made a lot more sense if she'd won there. And Baby Jane, of course, which, again, would have been a slam dunk great winner. The fact that she won for this absolute nonsense is kind of frustrating, to be honest.
Yeah. Looking at all of her nominations, this is definitely towards the bottom, if not the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
even she thought that Katharine Hepburn should have won. I mean, it just seems so obvious when you watch them all.
Yeah, it really, really does. I agree with her, and I love how she's so honest and upfront about that.
This point exactly where she just basically had enough. She won the Oscar and then she went on strike, basically, didn't she? Because they were giving us such crappy scripts, and they did improve them. Clearly the budget's got bigger, the co-stars got better, and it worked. It's funny that she won an Oscar and then decided that she needed better scripts, but she needed better scripts. I mean, they were just shocking.
So any other performances or films or anything you wanted to mention from this year before we close it out?
I would, if there's no way we'll ever know this, but it would be really interesting to know what the supporting nominees would have been, wouldn't it? Because usually there's a lot more to talk about, as you're probably realising up at this point. The acting nominees are so bland. We've only got 2 films in the Best Actor, and 3 of them are three of them all rule each other out. The actress, how many of the actress nominees have you seen? Because it's a really, really obscure bunch. It really is.
I've only seen the 2, which is Dangerous and Alice Adams.
So I watched Escape Me Never for the first time ever today, and it's just a really, really bad, grainy audition of it on YouTube, which you have to watch through 9 different clips to watch it. Elizabeth Bergen is really, really good. The film is not really good. Elizabeth Bergen's great. Claudette Colbert in Private World is a really weird film about mental hospitals and sexism or something. I watched that a while back. And then Becky Sharp. I'd always thought Becky Sharp, Miriam Hopkins in Becky Sharp was also absolutely terrible. But watching it again, she's not as bad as I remembered either. Not as over the top as I thought before. But it's just a very, very weird lineup. When you look at it and think there's one, Alice Adams is the only film that you would consider a classic, really, isn't it? Everything else is almost would be forgotten if it hadn't been nominated for an Oscar. Everything else there.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah, I didn't know if I wanted to watch any of the others here. I did actually consider watching The Dark Angel because Merle Oberon gets her sole nomination here, and she is the first actress of Asian descent to get an Oscar nomination. But can't say that I've seen it.
Even if that wasn't known at the time. And I think she's still to this day the first one ever the only one to ever be nominated in the Best Actress category, isn't she?
Yes, Correct.
It's just like,
which is
shocking. I have seen Dark Angel, and I even can tell you exactly when I saw it. It was in 1993. And I know that because I can remember the room I was sat in when I watched it. So I have nothing to say about it other than I think there's something set in a swamp. That's the only thing I remember about it.
Sounds fun.
Fit it in, but I ran out of time.
Fair enough. All right. Well, that is all I have on 1935. A lot to talk about there. And do you have any other lasting thoughts on that before we move on to our final verdict?
No, not at all. I pity the people listening in to me babbling on for 2.5 hours. So
no,
I apologize to everybody.
I know that they're loving it. They're loving it. Yes. All right. So when we come back, we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Mutiny on the Bounty deserved Best Picture or if The Informer deserved it more.
I've had enough of this bloodship. He's the master of life and death on a quarterdeck above the angels. McCoy! Clem! I'm sick of blood. Bloody backs, bloody faces. Why are you giving your last command on this ship? We'll be men again if we hang for it.
Casting me adrift 3,500 miles from a port of call. You're sending me to my doom, eh? Well, you're wrong, Christian. I'll take this boat as she floats to England if I must. I'll live to see you, all of you, hanging from the highest yard arm in the British fleet. Get those men out!
Voyage of the Bounty.
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Mutiny on the Bounty deserved Best Picture or if The Informer deserved it more. Baby Clyde, what is your verdict?
I am firmly Team Informer. Hashtag Team Informer.
Hashtag Team Informer.
The reason about it is it's a perfectly decent winner. You know, I'm in no way criticising its win. I totally had the same way. And it maybe even is the right winner in the context, but The Informer is a better film. Let's be honest.
Yes, and I will totally co-sign that. I am also hashtag Team Informer. And I feel like I am like one of the cool kids who's like with the critics being like, hey, The Informer really should have won Best Picture, not this big splashy crowd pleasing thing, you know. But I think they're both great. I agree. They're both definitely in the top 2 or 3 of this lineup, so they didn't go wrong either way, but I think more people should watch The Informer. I don't know how much people watch it nowadays, as much as just people just checking off Best Picture winners to watch. But
I think it's just us, to be honest, isn't it? It's just
well,
us, really.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but I would agree. Yeah. But yeah, The Informer should have won, but they couldn't have gone wrong either way. So with that, thank you so much, Baby Clyde, for talking about 1935 at the Oscars. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I've been doing this since I was like about 11 years old. That's when I became obsessed with the Oscars. So if all this time later I finally got someone who actually wants to hear me talk about it, is like kind of a treat.
Yes.
I'm also want to thank you just for making me delve back into the 30s, which I haven't done for a long time, and remind myself just how much I love that period and love those stars and love those films. Although I have to say I'm very much looking forward to coming off this and just watching Borat or something.
You know, that's very fair. That's a very jarring transition, but I don't blame you at all. And I recommend it. So there you go. So where can they find more from you on the internet?
On the Tinterweb, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Baby Clyde Oscars, where I basically just talk about the Oscars. I'm on Letterboxd again at I think it's just Baby Clyde, and I write regularly for the Film Experience. I basically do like old school Hollywood and the Oscars. You're unlikely to find me writing about new releases, but if you want to hear about Lana Turner, then I'm your guy.
Or Mickey Rooney.
Or Mickey Rooney, yes.
Yes. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to hear even more Oscar talk, go to patreon.com/AndTheRunnerUp for bonus episodes. And with that, thank you again, Baby Clyde. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I will bid you all adieu.